2 is more about me. And in the summertime, you got to remember there is 2 sides to a family. There is the man's side and his family, and the woman's side and her family. Well, on my mother's side of the family, they had friends. The family had a lot of friends, made a lot of friends, and these friends had a cottage which you could go to in the summertime for a vacation at a place called Sandy Pond, which was north of Syracuse by 50 miles. It also is a big kind of a bay, a secret little bay of Big Lake Ontario. And this pond, Sandy Pond, was noted for fishing and sandy shores and beaches and camps they were nice camps. And it was a good-sized lake, not really a pond. It had many, many things. Well, as I was growing up, I used to go with my grandparents and my mother, being a young person, very young, talking about 6, 7, 8 years old. I used to go with my mother, and she stayed with my grandparents, who rented one of the cottages on Sandy Pond every year, every summer. They became friends with this one family that rented. Okay, after that, I grew up and used to go to Sandy Pond every summer. And in order to get some pin money or expending money, I used to work. And one of the things that I used to do would be to help in a little country store, and I would kind of clean or sweep, and that way they would pay me, so much for doing that. And then I happened to make friends with a guy by the name of Rusty, and Rusty was the garbage man. And he and I kind of got along very well. So Rusty says to me, "Hey, how would you like to work for me and help me out collecting the garbage around in Sandy Pond?" I said, "Oh, hey, that's a good idea." So I worked for Rusty, and we'd go around picking up garbage in the little village of Sandy Pond. So that's how I earned some money. But I found out that Rusty was also what is known back in those days as the bouncer. And a bouncer was a person who took over, and he was paid. And if there was rowdy people or people that didn't behave themselves, why, the bouncer would kick them out of wherever this was. Well, Rusty was the bouncer for the roller skating rink at Sandy Pond. And so he and I became very good friends. And he said to me, "Hey," he said, "you ever roller skate?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I love to roller skate." And he said, "Well, tell you what, if you work for me, I'll pay you so much. But then," he said, "I'll get you in the roller skating rink on Saturday night, Friday and Saturday night for free." I said, "Oh, that's a good deal." So that's what we did. And so every Friday, Saturday night, I would go over to the roller skating rink and have free skating, which, boy, that was great. Just because I was helping him pick up garbage. So that worked out very well. Not only was I making money, but I had some perks. Okay, that took place for quite a couple of years. But there was another asset to going to Sandy Pond, and that was fishing. Because my grandfather on my mother's side of the family, his name was Charlie Young, and he liked fishing very, very much. The fishing back in those days was called trolling, not only were you able to still fish with a fishing pole, but also trolling. And the fish that were in this sandy pond lake area, they had whitefish, they had sunnies, sunfish, they had pickerel, and another kind of fish which was very popular, and it was called Great Northern Pike. They were a long fish, kind of fat, but long, and had a big snouty nose that stuck out in front. Okay? But you trolled, and what you had was a long line, a fishing line, and on the end of it was what they called a spoon hook. And sometimes it was 3 hooks all in one. Sometimes it was only what looked like a little metal spoon, like it looked actually like the bottom of a spoon, and on the end was 1 hook or 3 hooks. And you pulled that in the water. You did not need any bait on it, and you pulled it through the water, and the spoon would flip and turn, twist as it went through the water, and it would attract the fish. And they thought it was some bug or something, because they painted some of them different colors, like all red with white spots, and that was called the red devil. Okay, so you put that on, and then you pulled it behind a boat, and you took, and back in those days, we didn't or could not afford a motor. Sometimes people did have motors, small motors, and so we would row the boat. Okay, so we took the rowboat, we would row, and every morning we'd go fishing and catch big northern pike. That was a lot of fun. Still fishing, we used to go and catch a lot of sunnies and bass. And there was another little area of sandy pond that was back in a bunch of weeds, and back in there were catfish. And we used to like catch catfish because they were supposedly good eating fish. All white meat, but good eating fish. Okay, so that kind of tells you a little bit about Sandy Pond. But while I was at Sandy Pond, there was another little angle of Sandy Pond I must tell you about, and that is that I love berries. I like berry pie. I like berry sauce, which you could put on ice cream, which was my favorite. Dessert, which is normal. I mean, everybody likes ice cream, right? So anyway, we used to go down on the south road of Sandy Pond and pick elderberries. They were a cluster of berries, almost like a little seeding of, like a currant. And they were on bushes. And it didn't take long to get a lot of berries. And you put these berries in, they came in clusters on a stem, and you stuff these in a brown paper bag that you get groceries in. And when you fill that bag, stuffed it really full with elderberries, that was enough for a pie. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, she used to cook these down and make sauce, or fill a pie crust to make pie. That was delicious. Okay, moving forward, years and years after we were going to Sandy Pond, I kept hearing about a story connected with the other side of my family's family, and my father and mother started talking about, every once in a while, they talk about Brantingham Lake. And I'm saying, what is Brantingham Lake? What is this? Well, they said, it's a lake up in the Adirondacks. Well, what's the Adirondacks? What is that all about? That's up in the mountains. Oh, okay, it's up there where they got a lot of trees, and they got bear, and they got these other animals, and the deer, and so forth. But there's a lake. Oh, there's lots of lakes, but one of them is called Brantingham. And so they got my curiosity up, because by that time I was around 10 years old. That would be 1937, because I was born in 1927. Okay, now it's 1937 and I'm 10 years old. And I kept teasing my parents. I said, would you please take me to Brantingham Lake? I want to see this lake that you're talking about. It sounds real good. Do they have fishing up there? Oh, yeah. Fishing, swimming, hiking. We didn't have bicycles, but, you'll love it. I said, okay. When are you going to take me? Well, we'll make arrangements and go up there for a long weekend sometime. Okay, so being a teenage, I teased and kept after them until they said, okay, we'll plan a little vacation and take you there. So back in 1937 was when I first came to Brantingham Lake. When I got up here, this is not true, but it's part of a story that there is a bug at Brantingham Lake. And if the bug bites you, you're going to want to come back and come back and come back. It's one of those little hypothetical things that, you get stuck with Brantingham and you just love it. Well, I did. I got bitten by the bug. And when I came up here, my parents made arrangements to stay at another hotel. They couldn't get reservations for Brantingham Inn, which you got to remember was where my father and mother went on their honeymoon back in 1925. So we went to a different hotel. The name of the hotel was Long Point Inn. And Long Point Inn was a beautiful hotel, and it was built on a point that stuck out because Brantingham Lake is divided like a horseshoe. And this point, of which there are 5 or 6 points on Brantingham Lake, but this was a long point that stuck way out into the middle of the lake. And the hotel was built probably halfway out on Long Point. And you could see both sides of the lake from the bedrooms on the left or the bedrooms on the right, which was pretty neat. And we met these people who owned it. Their name was Wantz, W-A-N-T-Z. And there was Old Man Wantz and his wife. His wife was a very, very good cook. She was the cook for the hotel. And she loved baking. And of course, I love baked goods. So she made plenty of pies. The only thing is that pies had a different kind of fruit in the pie called blueberries. Now, blueberries in Brantingham they're wild. They're on little low bushes. And really, the old-timers that live up there at Brantingham, they call them huckleberries. Now, huckleberry comes from the language used by peasants that came from Europe, and they were, I'm trying to think here, Hungarians. Now, Hungarians came from Hungary, which was a country south of Germany on the map of Europe. Okay, this area was typical of where they lived over in Europe, so they settled up here because of it being similar to their homeland. Okay, this hotel was beautiful, great. And the people that rented or stayed there were very, very kind, very nice people, and I became very friendly with a man by the name of Charlie. And Charlie used to take me fishing because I kept talking about my grandfather, and on my mother's side, Grandpa Young, Charlie Young. And he said, I'll take you fishing, so he knew where to go. And he used to take me fishing We go down from the hotel down towards the edge of the lake, and there was a boathouse, a large boathouse. It had 3 big boat slips in there and a big area to play up on the top. It had like a pavilion up on the top. And so did this other hotel across the lake called Brantingham Inn. They also had a big boathouse. And it was kind of fun because on Saturday night, or I should say Friday night, Long Point Inn, where I stayed, they had a dance in the hotel out on up top of the boathouse. On Saturday night, Brantingham Inn across the lake had a dance over there with band playing. Wow, this is pretty neat. Okay, so Charlie took me fishing, and he knew just where to go because we rode, because we didn't have motors back in those days. There were motors, but they were small and expensive. So the hotel had a couple, but you had to rent them. And if you stayed at the hotel, well, you could rent a rowboat or a canoe, but you could also rent one with a motor if you paid more. Okay, so Charlie took me out in the boat, and we rowed to offshore, and you have to know your directions, whether you're going east, south, north, or west. He took me kind of in a southeast direction, and he went out in the lake maybe, I'm going to say a half a city block. And down in the water, there was a big mountain of rocks. And he said, down below, underneath us, he said, is this kind of mountain with rocks, but you couldn't see it. And he said, I know because I'm looking at the trees, I'm looking at that camp over there. And he says, I can judge just about where we are. And we'll drop what they call a sinker line. Tie a big heavy sinker on a twine, drop it down, and then measure. And if it's so deep, you know you're over this mountain of rocks down in the water. And we caught fish that day, which was great. Don't ask me, I don't remember the names, but we caught a lot of fish at this one particular spot. So we did that for several days. Meantime, at this hotel where I was staying with my parents, my father liked to go blueberry picking, and he also liked to go on what we call a safari. Now, that's a distraction. Distraction is like if you go off a little ways off the main path and this kind of thing. So he would like to wander around and go exploring is the better word at this point, to find out what's over here and what's over there. And so the proprietor, his name was Old Man Wants. Don't ask me his first name because I can't. I think it was George. But anyway, he suggested to my father that I learn something about the Adirondacks. And he had a kind of an odd station wagon car back in those days. And so he used to take the hotel guests on safaris. And he suggested that I go one of these days with him and whoever else would like to go. And he'd pile us into the station wagon. And he was going to take us to see what they called making lumber out of trees back in the woods. So he took us on a trip, an exploration, and we went to a place called Tom's Mountain. Today it's called Mount Tom on the map. So we went there and we watched them do tree cutting by using an axe. No big machinery, no big excavation like we have in the modern day of today. where you chopped it down with a big axe. And they would fall these trees, then they would skid them out with horse and I'm trying to think of the name of a whipple. Now a whipple is a bar which goes in between two horses. And you hook up the horses to that and then they both pull. And so they would skid these trees, these logs, out to the road and cut them up. And back in those days, they were beginning to have power equipment, so they had what is known as a big saw. And this saw was gas-powered, gasoline-powered. It was not a chainsaw. It was different than a chainsaw of today. Okay, so I watched them do this cutting of these trees. They would haul them out to the edge of the road. They would take and skid them on logs that were built special, and they would roll them up on these skids to the top of a wagon and dump them into a wagon. The wagon and the horses would then pull them to a local mill, and then down at the mill they had a big gasoline engine from back in the old days, run by steam engines. And these would spin this wheel, which had teeth on it, called a saw blade, and they would slice these logs up into lumber boards of different sizes, which was used for building everything that you could think of in those days. So that was an education for me. And then another fun thing was that the hotel didn't have they had a beach in front of the hotel, but the beach dropped off. In other words, it only went out maybe 25 feet, and then it dropped off and got real deep. And a lot of hotel guests had little babies and little kids. So at that point, the hotel made arrangements with the local government, because near the hotel was a great big wide sandy beach. And this big wide sandy beach went out for hundreds of feet, and it did not get very deep. And they had the permission and the use, I think they may have paid some money to be able to use this beach. And so they used this beach, which was near the hotel. It's still there today, but it's privately owned by several families. However, somehow or other, in what is known in a governmental way as a permission, they gave the hotel permission for ever to use this beach, and they called it a public beach. And that still exists today, the permission from the town government that beach is still a public beach, and there is still, it's overgrown with trees and foliage, but there is a path from the road, which is up inland just a little bit, to this beach. It's still there, and it still exists, and it's still lawful as a public beach. We used to go down there from the hotel, which we had to walk a little ways, maybe like a city block, to get there. But you took your bathing suit or your towel, and if you had some little toy with you or something that would float, you could take that with you. And they did have some things that they could put around you, like tubes. They used to, back in my day, back in 1937, they used to use inner tubes from car tires, because back in those days, all the tires that were on cars had an inside rubber tube. And they used to take those tubes and patch them a little bit if they got a hole in them. And you used to use that as a swimming or as a, like today they have all kinds of different kinds of things that you can go out on, floats, this kind of thing. Well, that was a float. So we used to take a tire inner tube with us and float around on that, and we thought that was great. But we'd go down to the sandy beach because that was more fun because you didn't have to worry about whether it's going to drop off. And I mean, if you could swim, that's no problem. But for little kids, this was better. So the hotel had many different advantages, many different things. And so, end of story as far as my first time, 1937, coming to Brantingham Lake.